There are moments in a marriage that don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive quietly, tucked inside something ordinary: a business trip, a shared taxi to the airport, a bag that isn't yours sitting at the bottom of your suitcase. I almost missed it entirely. We were leaving for Calgary on a Thursday morning. Trevor had a 2-day conference with his firm, and I was tagging along, or that's what I told myself. The truth was, I hadn't been invited so much as accommodated. There's a difference, and I'd been pretending not to know it for a while. I'm a paralegal. Was a paralegal, I should say, before Trevor and I got married 6 years ago, and I agreed, slowly, and almost without noticing, to become something else. It started with, just take a few months off while I'm getting the promotion sorted. Then it became, we can afford for you not to work. Why stress yourself? Then it became the shape of my life. I stopped tracking my own billable hours and started tracking his dry cleaning pickup schedule instead. We lived in a nice house in Oakville, we had a good car, and a joint account that he managed. We went to dinner parties where people asked Trevor about his work and asked me how I liked the neighborhood. I had stopped minding, and that was the worst part. The morning we left for Calgary, I was packing while Trevor showered. I'd already laid out my clothes, tucked in the toiletry bag, zipped the inner pocket. I was reaching for my cardigan when I noticed the canvas tote sitting at the base of my open suitcase. It was beige, with a small logo on the front. Meridian Financial Group, the company where Trevor worked as a senior portfolio manager. I didn't own anything from Meridian. I'd never been given branded merchandise, never attended a company event where they handed things out. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. I stood there in our bedroom with the shower still running and the tote in my hands, and something quiet moved through me. Not alarm, exactly. More like the feeling you get when a sound stops and you realize you'd been hearing it all along. I unzipped it. Inside, a slim manila envelope, sealed. A small external hard drive, the kind that's no bigger than a deck of cards. And underneath both of those, a clear plastic sleeve holding what looked like a stack of photographs. I pulled one out. It was a photo of a woman, professional headshot style, but printed on regular paper, not studio quality. She was in her early 30s, dark hair, wearing a blazer. I vaguely recognized from the office Christmas party Trevor had dragged me to 2 years ago. I flipped to the next one. Same woman, different angle, laughing at something off camera. The third photo was the two of them together, Trevor and this woman standing close at what looked like a restaurant I didn't recognize. Her name was Vanessa. I'd heard it once or twice, Trevor's colleague. His work wife, someone had joked at that Christmas party. I'd laughed because that's what you do. I heard the shower turn off. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Zipped the tote, set it where it had been. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and watched Trevor come out of the bathroom in his towel, talking about whether we should grab Tim Hortons on the way to Pearson or wait for the airport. Whatever you want, I said. He smiled. He was always charming in the mornings. In my chest, something had gone very still. I didn't say anything on the drive to the airport. Trevor talked about his agenda for the conference. Panels he was moderating, a dinner with a client from Edmonton. I watched the highway and nodded at the right moments, and thought about that tote bag sitting in my suitcase. I thought about why it was there. Trevor hadn't put it there by accident. Trevor was meticulous to the point of being annoying about it. His socks were organized by color, his calendar had color-coded blocks. He'd once reorganized my bookshelf, without asking, because the spines were facing different directions. He did not accidentally place things, so he'd put it there on purpose. The question was why? The only answer I could come up with, turning it over on the 401 while the radio played something I couldn't hear, was that he needed it not to be in his luggage. He needed someone else to be carrying it. He'd chosen me, his wife, the woman who'd given up her career, the woman who trusted him, because I was the safest option. I wouldn't ask questions. I'd carry whatever he put in front of me. I had been, without knowing it, extremely useful. We parked at the long-term lot and took the shuttle to Terminal 1. Vanessa was meeting us at the check-in counter. I'd known she would be there. Trevor had mentioned it once, casually. The way you mention something you've decided in advance is not a problem. She was part of his team. Of course she'd be at the conference. She was already there when we arrived, pulling her luggage toward the Air Canada desk, wearing a camel coat and a small leather tote over one shoulder. Not the Meridian canvas bag. That one was in my suitcase. She greeted us warmly. She greeted me warmly. She had a good smile and a firm handshake, and I stood there thinking about the photographs. We checked in, together. Trevor handed things to the desk agent, and I stood slightly behind, holding my carry-on, watching Vanessa and my husband talk the way people talk when they've spent a lot of time together, finishing each other's thoughts, abbreviating references that excluded me. At some point, Trevor excused himself to use the washroom. Vanessa and I stood together by a pillar, making the kind of small talk that lives in the outer ring of a marriage. "He talks about you a lot," she said. "Does he?" I said. "He's very proud of how you've managed the house, all of it." She said this like it was a compliment. I accepted it like one. Our checked luggage had gone ahead. We moved toward security. Trevor fell into step beside Vanessa, and they kept talking. I walked slightly behind with my carry-on and the particular clarity that comes when you've decided something without quite realizing you've decided it. We reached the security queue and separated into individual lanes. Trevor was 2 lanes over. Vanessa was in the lane beside him. I was to their left. I watched her put her carry-on onto the belt. Her camel coat went into a bin, her laptop, her shoes. Then I put my carry-on down, opened the main compartment, and took out the Meridian tote. I placed it in a separate bin and put the bin on the belt. Then I watched. I don't know exactly what I expected. I think some part of me had expected nothing. That the bin would go through, and the bag would come out the other side, and I'd pick it up, and that would be that. And I'd spend the rest of the trip knowing what I knew. But the belt stopped. The CBSA officer at the screening station leaned toward the monitor. She said something to her colleague. Her colleague looked at the screen. They exchanged a few words, and then one of them came around the side of the machine. "Ma'am, is this your bin?" "No," I said. "I thought it was mine, but it's actually my colleague's. I must have grabbed it by mistake." I turned and called Vanessa's name. She turned around. "I think I picked up your bag by accident," I said, nodding toward the bin. "This is yours, right? The Meridian one?" The confusion on her face lasted about 2 seconds before something else moved through it, something faster and harder to name. I don't." The officer looked between us. "Ma'am, do you know what's in this bag?" Trevor had been watching from 2 lanes over. I could feel him before I looked. When I did look, his face had done something I'd never seen it do. Every careful, managed expression he'd built over 11 years had dropped at once. He came out of his lane. That bag was in my wife's luggage. I don't know how it ended up." "Sir, please stay in your lane," the officer said. He stopped. He looked at me. I looked back at him with the calmest expression I have ever worn in my life. The bag was taken to a secondary screening area. Vanessa was asked to come with them. Trevor stood at the edge of his lane with his carry-on at his feet and his mouth slightly open. I collected my things from the belt. I put on my shoes. I walked through to the other side. I did not look back. There was a cafe past security, near Gate D. I ordered a large dark roast. Not a double-double, not anything sweetened, just the coffee black and hot. And I sat at a table by the window and watched planes on the tarmac. Trevor found me 12 minutes later. I know because I watched the clock above the departures board. He sat down across from me. He didn't have coffee. He looked like a man who had just seen a building fall over. "What did you do?" he said. Not a question. More like a statement that hadn't landed yet. "I went through security," I said. "You moved that bag." "Did I?" I looked at him. I thought it was mine. We had matching luggage. "You remember, you picked them both out at that store in Mississauga." He stared at me. "Trevor," I said, "why was there a bag in my suitcase that I didn't pack?" He was quiet for a long time. Around us, the gate area filled and shifted. Families with strollers, business travelers checking phones, a group of teenagers with hockey bags. Normal Thursday morning airport life. "It was just documents," he said finally. "Work documents, Liza. And photographs." His jaw moved. "In an external hard drive," I said. "Containing what, exactly?" He didn't answer that. "Why was it in my bag, Trevor?" He looked past my shoulder. A practiced pause. "I needed to get some materials to Calgary without going through the firm's system. There are compliance issues if certain files go through the company server. It's a gray area." "A gray area," I repeated. "It's complicated." "You put it in my bag," I said, "without telling me. You needed someone to carry materials that couldn't go through your firm's system, and you chose me. Why?" He didn't answer because the answer was obvious. Because I wouldn't ask. Because I was safe. Because I had been, for 6 years, the kind of wife who carried what she was given without reading the label. My flight to Calgary was on the same plane as his. I boarded it. I sat in my seat, which was in a different row from his, because we'd been assigned separately cozy, and I'd declined the upgrade when the gate agent offered, and I read a novel I'd bought at the Hudson News kiosk, and I did not think about him at all. Or I tried not to. What I actually thought about was the woman I used to be, the one who'd had a desk, and a caseload, and a salary, and a sense of her own hours. And how she'd been very methodically replaced by a woman whose primary skill had become anticipating what someone else needed before he asked for it. In Calgary, I checked into the hotel room. Trevor was at a separate conference dinner that night. I ordered room service, chicken tikka masala, a glass of Pinot Gris, and I called my older sister Deborah in Hamilton. Deborah is a high school vice principal. She has what I've always called a zero-nonsense radius. Within a certain distance of her, nonsense simply cannot survive. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. She didn't say anything for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "Have you called anyone at the Law Society yet?" "I'm still a paralegal, not a lawyer," I said. "I'd be calling about reinstating my credentials." "Then call whoever you need to call," she said. "Tonight." "Deborah, you know what this is," she said. "You've known since you found that bag. You're just deciding whether you're going to keep being convenient or whether you're going to be yourself again." I didn't sleep well that night, but I made 2 calls. The first was to my former colleague Priya, who still worked at the firm where I'd been a paralegal before I married Trevor. She answered on the third ring, a little surprised, and we talked for 40 minutes. She told me the firm had actually been looking to fill a contract position. She told me that getting reinstated with the Law Society of Ontario would take a few steps, but wasn't as complicated as I feared. She said, twice, that it was good to hear from me. The second call I made was to a family law lawyer named Helen, whose card I'd kept in my wallet for 3 years. Not because I'd planned to need her, but because some part of me had always known, in the way you know a sound is wrong before you can name it, that I might. The conference ran for 2 days. Trevor tried to talk to me, in the hotel elevator, at the breakfast buffet, in a brief and halting conversation outside the conference center on day 2, where he stood in the Alberta cold in his good coat and told me that the situation with Vanessa was not what I was thinking. "I'm not thinking anything," I said. "I'm listening. She and I, it's professional. The documents were sensitive because of a deal we were working on outside the firm's normal process. Certain clients prefer Trevor," I said. "I was a paralegal for 8 years. I know what outside the firm's normal process means." He stopped. "It means the firm doesn't know about it," I said. "Which means either it's being done for a client who doesn't want compliance eyes on it, or it's being done for someone who isn't technically a client at all. Either way, you needed a person to carry it who couldn't be connected to you professionally." "You're making this sound worse then." "I'm describing it accurately," I said. "That's different from making it sound worse." He looked at me for a long moment. I don't know what he saw. Whatever it was, it seemed to unsettle him more than the anger would have. Back in Oakville, things moved differently than I expected. I'd half prepared myself for confrontation, for raised voices, for the kind of rupture that announces itself. What happened instead was quieter and in some ways harder. Trevor came home from the conference and was careful and courteous and slightly watchful, the way people are when they're not sure what the other person knows. I didn't tell him what I was doing. I contacted my LSUC membership coordinator and started the reinstatement process for my paralegal license. I updated my resume, which took an entire evening because I'd let it lapse so completely. I nearly didn't recognize the person in it. I started working again with Priya's firm on a contract basis, 3 days a week, from a small office in Mississauga. I didn't ask Trevor's permission. I just did it. He noticed within a week. "You're working?" he said one evening, finding me at the kitchen table with a file and a highlighter. "Yes," I said. "When did this happen?" "Recently," I said. I turned a page. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. Then he went upstairs. The question I kept returning to wasn't whether to leave. I already knew the answer to that. The question was what I was leaving toward. That felt more important. I'd spent 6 years defining myself by what I'd given up, and I didn't want to spend the next chapter doing the same thing in reverse, defining myself by what I was escaping. What happened with Vanessa and the documents came out gradually, the way these things do. 2 weeks after we returned from Calgary, Trevor was called into a meeting with his firm's compliance officer. Apparently, the CBSA screening at Pearson had flagged a concern. Not because anything in the bag was illegal, exactly, but because it contained materials that, under FinTrack reporting requirements, should have been processed through the firm's official channels. The deal they'd been structuring, a private real estate syndication with offshore components, had bypassed the firm's money laundering review process entirely. Vanessa was placed on administrative leave while the firm conducted an internal investigation. Trevor was given the same. Their arrangement with the offshore client, whatever it had been, was now being reviewed by the firm's legal team and, from what I understood through Priya, potentially by regulators. I don't know all the details of what happened after that because, by then, I had removed myself from the position of being the person who needed to know them. What I know is that Trevor called me one evening in November from what I later learned was Vanessa's apartment. His location came up on the Find My app we'd shared, which he'd forgotten to disconnect, and that he told me he thought we should take some time apart. "I've already spoken with Helen," I said. A pause. "Who's Helen?" "My lawyer," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "You have a lawyer?" "Yes." Another pause. "When did you get a lawyer?" "Calgary," I said. "The second night." I think about that moment sometimes, not with bitterness exactly, but with a kind of sharp attention. The specific feeling of having been ready before you were asked to be. Of having prepared, quietly, while someone else was still operating on the assumption that you hadn't. The divorce took several months. Trevor and I had a separation agreement drafted by the spring. The house in Oakville was sold and we divided the proceeds. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Etobicoke, near the lake. The second bedroom was my home office, where I worked on contract files in the evenings and on weekends, while my main job at Priya's firm filled the weekdays. My mother called me on the day I moved in. She is not a demonstrative woman. She's French-Canadian from Sudbury, and she shows care through practical action rather than language. But she drove down from Sudbury that weekend with her partner Francois. And the two of them helped me assemble the IKEA bookshelf that had come in 15 pieces. And she made soup on the second night from things she'd brought from home in a cooler. At some point during the soup she said, without looking up from her bowl, "You seem more like yourself." "I think I am," I said. "Good," she said. And that was all. Deborah came down the following weekend with a bottle of Niagara Riesling, and we sat on my small balcony, looking out over Lake Ontario, as the light went flat and orange across the water. We talked for a long time about the things you talk about when you're starting over, what you want, what you'd done differently, what you hadn't known you'd been missing until it came back. "Do you regret it?" she asked at one point. Not unkindly, just the question. I thought about it honestly, the way she deserved. "I regret letting it go as long as I did," I said. "I don't regret leaving." She nodded. She topped up my glass. "What I know now, and what I'm still learning how to hold, is that the most dangerous arrangements are the ones that feel choices when you're in them. I chose to stop working. I chose to follow Trevor's plan for our life. I chose, every month for 6 years, not to examine the account he managed, or the documents I signed, or the dynamic that had made me, very gradually, into someone who could be counted on to carry what she was given. The bag he planted in my suitcase was almost beside the point. What it exposed wasn't just his dishonesty, it was the version of me that had been built to make that dishonesty easy. I'm a paralegal again. I have my own checking and savings accounts at 2 separate institutions. I have clients and files and a schedule that's mine, and a salary deposited to a number only I know. I make my own coffee in the mornings, and some mornings I drink it standing at my window looking at the lake, and I feel something I didn't have a word for a long time. It's not happiness, exactly. Or not only that. It's the feeling of being legible to yourself again. Of recognizing the shape of your own life, and understanding that you're the one who made it. Trevor and I haven't spoken since the separation was finalized. Vanessa, from what I understand through people who still work at the firm, has relocated to Vancouver. The offshore deal was unwound. No charges were laid, but the clients quietly moved their business elsewhere, and Trevor's reputation in the industry absorbed a dent that I suspect will take years to recover from. If it does. I don't think about either of them very much. That sounds harder to believe than it is. The Thursday I found that bag, I almost didn't open it. I stood in our bedroom with the shower running and the candle in On's hands, and I came very close to putting it back, smoothing it down, and pretending I hadn't noticed the weight of it. I'm glad I didn't. Not because of what it revealed about Trevor, but because of what it made clear about me. The distance between who I'd been and who I still was underneath, waiting with more patience than I deserved. Some things don't announce themselves as turning points. They arrive in the bottom of a suitcase, heavier than they look, on an ordinary Thursday morning. You can put them back, or you can open them and let them change everything. I opened it, and I didn't look back.